Death may not be the closing of your eyes. It may be the moment they finally open. Consider this strange possibility. Every night, without realizing it, you practice vanishing. You slip out of yourself, lose your name, forget your body, and dissolve into something that has no clock and no edges. And every morning you return, gathering the pieces of who you are, as if nothing extraordinary happened. We call this sleep. We treat it as ordinary, but it is one of the most mysterious things a human being can do, and we do it so often we forget to notice. Welcome, gentle listener. If these long, slow explorations bring you any quiet, you might consider staying with this channel a little longer. There is no rush here. Nothing to solve tonight. What follows is a slow walk along the edge of one of the oldest questions ever whispered into the dark. If sleep is a small disappearance we always wake from, then what exactly is the larger disappearance we call dying? Could the act of dying be less like a curtain falling and more like a curtain rising on a perception we were never quite ready to hold? Researchers have noticed something curious in the dying brain. In the final moments, a surge of high-frequency activity sometimes appears, the same kind that flickers through us in our most vivid dreams. A doorway, perhaps, or perhaps only a flicker. Tonight, we wonder. Settle in for a moment. Feel the small weight of your body against whatever is holding you right now. The pillow, the mattress, the quiet hum of the room. Notice that you feel awake, or something like awake. And yet, if someone asked you to define that feeling precisely, you might struggle. We tend to think of being awake as a simple switch. Either the lights are on, or they are off. Either you are here, or you are not. But the brain does not work that way. Waking is not a single state. It is more like a slow tide of small adjustments. 1,000 quiet decisions made beneath your awareness, gathering into the sensation that you exist. Each morning, somewhere deep inside your head, a small almond-shaped structure called the thalamus begins to let signals through. Think of it as a soft gatekeeper. While you slept, it muted the outside world, dimming sound, touch, light, smell. As you wake, it eases that gate open, and reality floods back in. The room reassembles itself. Your name returns. The story of your life picks up where it left off. What feels like waking up is really a kind of reconstruction. The you who closes your eyes tonight is not the same one who opens them tomorrow. Not exactly. Memory has been rearranged, cells have died and been replaced, mood has shifted, and yet, somehow you wake into the feeling that nothing has changed. That continuity is not a fact about the world. It is a feeling the brain quietly assembles for you every single morning. Researchers have noticed something even stranger. A loose constellation of regions, sometimes called the default mode network, lights up when you are not focused on anything in particular. It hums in the background of daydreaming, of remembering, of imagining who you are. Some have suggested it is part of how the self gets stitched together. When it quiets, the sense of being a separate person quiets too. When it brightens, you feel sharply like yourself. So being awake is less like turning on a lamp and more like an orchestra tuning up. Different sections of the brain begin to find each other. Rhythms align, patterns settle, and out of all that quiet coordination, a single sensation arises. The sensation of being here, being now, being someone. This is worth pausing on, because if waking is something the brain builds rather than simply receives, then the line between being conscious and being unconscious is softer than it seems. There may not be a clean wall between the two. There may be a slow gradient, a long fade, a delicate weaving in and out, and if that is true, then perhaps the great transitions of life, the ones we fear most, are not as sharp as we imagine. They may be more like long fades themselves, like a song slowly turning down, like a window slowly opening onto something new. For now, simply notice that the awareness behind your eyes right now is a constructed wonder. It is being assembled, moment by moment, by a body resting in the dark. Hold that softly, let it feel a little strange, because that strangeness is the first quiet step into the longer journey of this night. There is a small moment every night that almost no one remembers. The moment you actually fall asleep. You can recall lying in bed, you can recall the last thought drifting through, and then somehow you are gone. Not afraid, not resisting, just gone, and later you return, and you call it morning. Think about how extraordinary this is. You vanish regularly, willingly, completely, and yet we treat it as the most ordinary thing in the world. We do not mourn the self we lose at night. We do not panic as awareness softens. We simply let go and trust we will come back. Sleep researchers have a name for the strange threshold between waking and sleeping. They call it the hypnagogic state. It is that drifting place where thoughts begin to loosen, where logic becomes flexible, where images start arriving uninvited. You might see colors behind your closed eyes. You might hear a voice that is not quite a voice. You might feel a sudden falling sensation, or imagine you have walked into a room that does not exist. None of this is a malfunction. It is the architecture of your mind quietly rearranging itself for the night. What is happening, in soft, simple terms, is that the brain is releasing its grip on the outer world. The thalamus, that gentle gatekeeper, is closing the doors of sense. The prefrontal cortex, the region most responsible for sharp, focused thought, begins to dim. The inner world rises up to fill the space the outer world is leaving. You are still here, but the rules are changing, and then, somewhere in that softening, you cross over. There is no alarm, no countdown, no final goodbye to the version of yourself awake just seconds before. You simply slip past the edge of remembering. This is worth sitting with, because if you really pay attention, falling asleep looks suspiciously like a small rehearsal, a practice run for letting go of awareness. We do it every night, most of us more than 20,000 times in a lifetime, and in all those crossings, we have never once felt harmed. We have never once felt punished for releasing the day. The body knows how to do this. The mind knows how to surrender. Some have wondered whether this familiarity is itself a quiet teaching. We are not strangers to the dissolving of self. We are not new to losing our story for a while. The version of you reading these words has crossed that threshold thousands of times already, and each crossing has been gentle, even tender. There is no record of fear at the moment of falling asleep, only the fear that comes from thinking about it from the outside, and maybe that is the strange comfort hidden inside this nightly ritual. The most terrifying sounding loss, the loss of self, is something you already do, quietly, calmly, without resistance. So as you lie here now, notice how natural that letting go feels when you are not fighting it. Notice that the same body that carried you through every previous night is here again, ready. The same softness is available. The same gate is loosening. Sleep is not the enemy of consciousness. It may be one of its kindest forms. When you dream, something quietly impossible happens. You build an entire world. You design landscapes you have never seen. You meet people who do not exist and yet feel familiar. You hear conversations, taste meals, walk through rooms, all without leaving your bed. And while it is happening, you almost never notice that any of it is unreal. Pause on that for a moment. Every night your brain becomes a small, private universe maker, and it does this with such confidence that you believe it completely. The dream is not a movie you watch. It is a world you live inside. How does the mind do this? Scientists studying sleep have noticed that during a stage called REM, short for rapid eye movement, the brain becomes almost as active as it is when you are awake. In some regions, even more so. Visual areas light up, even though your eyes are closed. Emotional centers fire as if real things are happening, and the regions normally responsible for skepticism, for questioning, for noticing that something is off, are quieter than usual. This combination is striking. The brain is generating intense experience while temporarily turning down its ability to doubt. So you wander through a dream city, meet a stranger who somehow feels like an old friend, and the part of you that might say, "This cannot be real," has gone soft. There is a gentle theory that helps explain this. Some neuroscientists describe the brain as a kind of prediction machine. Even when you are awake, much of what you see and hear is not raw signal. It is your brain's best guess, refined moment by moment against incoming information. The world you perceive is partly a forecast, partly a memory, partly a story your mind tells itself in real time. In dreams, the incoming information goes quiet, the senses retreat, and the prediction machine, freed from correction, simply runs on its own. It dreams up its own input, it paints its own sky, it invents its own conversation, and because there is nothing outside to argue with, it all feels real. This leads to a quiet, surprising idea. The same machinery that builds your dreams is the machinery that builds your waking life. The difference is mostly about how much the outside world is allowed to weigh in. Dreams are not a separate magic. They are the mind doing what it always does, only without the steady tug of the senses to keep it honest. And so each night you practice creating reality from the inside. You practice believing in a world that is not anchored to any room, any clock, any body. You practice being conscious inside something the brain alone has made. Some have wondered whether this nightly rehearsal is preparing us for something, whether the ability to dream is also the ability to inhabit experience without a physical world to lean on. We cannot answer that with certainty, but it is hard not to notice the pattern. For tonight, simply hold this thought softly. The same mind that will dream you into a forest, a memory, a half-familiar room, is the mind that dreams you into being awake. The boundary between these is thinner than it seems, and perhaps that thinness is part of what makes us so quietly extraordinary. There is a quiet truth that, once seen, never quite lets you see ordinary life the same way again. You are not perceiving the world directly. Not really. You are perceiving a careful, beautiful interpretation of it, built by your brain in the smallest fractions of a second. Take something simple. A glance around the room. The colors, the shapes, the depth, the soft sense that things are real and out there. It feels seamless. It feels like a window, but it is not a window. It is closer to a painting that the brain refreshes constantly, using fragments of light, sound, memory, and prediction. Consider the eyes. They take in only a narrow slice of all the light that exists. Beyond what they catch, there are vast bands of radiation passing through this room right now that you cannot see. Radio waves, infrared, ultraviolet, the colors of bees and snakes and birds. You are surrounded by signals you will never directly experience. And what you do see, what you call color, is a translation. Wavelengths turned into sensations the brain invents to help you navigate. This is sometimes called the controlled hallucination idea. Some researchers describe waking perception as a hallucination that happens to line up with the world. The brain is constantly guessing what is out there based on patterns it has learned. Then it adjusts those guesses against the trickle of information arriving through the senses. What you experience is not the world itself, but the brain's best ongoing story about the world. Most of the time, this story works beautifully. You reach for the cup, and your hand finds it. You step forward, and the floor is there. The model is good enough that you almost never feel its presence. It feels like reality. It feels like simply seeing, but occasionally the model slips. Optical illusions, sounds that seem to come from nowhere, the strange feeling that a familiar room looks different for a moment. These are little tears in the veil, places where the construction shows through, and once you have noticed them, it becomes harder to forget that perception is always a construction. Now hold this gently against the question of waking and dying. If even your most ordinary morning is a careful interpretation, a layered hallucination tuned to the outside world, then what is the difference between dream reality and waking reality really? Both are made by the same brain. Both are stories told to a perceiving self. Both feel utterly convincing while they are happening. This is not a frightening idea. It is a humbling one. It softens the certainty that what we see is the whole of what is. It leaves room for the possibility that waking and dreaming are two settings on the same instrument, and that other settings may exist, glimpsed at the edges of meditation, illness, deep silence, or perhaps in the long fade of life. For tonight, Simply notice that the world you are aware of in this moment is partly a gift of your own mind. The warmth of the blanket, the dim shapes around you, the quiet hum of being here, all of it is real, yes, but it is also tenderly assembled, and there is something deeply comforting in knowing that this assembly is happening for you gently, without your effort, even now. Some of you know this hour very well, the hour when the world has gone quiet, but the mind has not, the hour when the body is tired in every cell, and yet there is a small persistent light inside that will not switch off. You turn, you sigh, you count breaths, and still, sleep stands just out of reach, like something shy that will not come closer the more you call it. If that is where you are tonight, you are in good company. Many of the people listening right now are not asleep. They are walking through their own minds in the dark, and there is no shame in that. There is only a long, common, very human struggle. The brain has a name for this restless state. Researchers sometimes describe it as hyperarousal. The body is laid down for rest, but the nervous system is still humming at a daytime frequency. Heart rate stays slightly elevated, stress hormones linger. The thalamus, that quiet gatekeeper of sense, refuses to fully close its doors. So the world keeps trickling in, and the mind keeps treating it as something to track. What makes insomnia especially strange is that it is often made worse by the effort to fix it. You try to relax, and the trying itself is a kind of work. You watch the clock and calculate how little time is left until morning, and that calculation pumps another small drop of stress into the system. The harder you push for sleep, the further it drifts. Sleep is one of the few things you cannot win by wanting more. Notice how perfectly this mirrors something larger. Through the whole of life, we hold tightly to awareness. We treat consciousness as the prize we must never let go of. We resist any moment that asks us to soften our grip. And insomnia, in its quiet way, is sometimes the body offering a small, uncomfortable lesson. Letting go is not something you do by trying harder. It is something you allow. This is not a scolding. There may be many reasons your sleep is restless. Pain, grief, an overworked life, a mind that has carried too much for too long. The point is not to blame the part of you that cannot rest. The point is to soften toward it. There is a tender paradox here. The same mind that fears losing control is the mind that has already let go of control, peacefully, on thousands of previous nights. Your body knows how to sleep. It has done so since before you had words. The skill is there, intact, waiting beneath the noise. It does not need to be summoned. It needs only to be uninterrupted. So if sleep will not come tonight, let that be all right. Listening, here, in this quiet, is also a kind of rest. The breath is still slow. The body is still horizontal. The lights are still low. Even when sleep refuses, something restorative is happening. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the wakefulness, your mind is also rehearsing for the deeper letting go we are slowly circling. Not in fear, not in urgency, just learning gently that release is something it already knows how to do, even when it forgets. For a few hours, in the dark, we have been walking softly around something. Maybe you have felt it. The sense that we are gathering threads, not weaving them yet. The patient circling of an idea that does not want to be rushed. So let us name it now, gently, without grasping. If waking from sleep feels like returning to yourself, what might waking from life feel like? It is a question that has lived in human minds for as long as there have been human minds. Every tradition has approached it. Every culture has whispered some version of it into the dark. Some have answered with certainty, others with silence. Tonight we will not try to answer. We will only sit with the shape of the question and let it begin to do its quiet work. Notice what is strange about the act of waking. Each morning you return from somewhere you cannot describe. You have no memory of most of the hours that have just passed. There is a gap, a blank, and yet you are not bothered by this gap. You do not grieve the missing time. You do not feel the night as a loss. You simply step back into being yourself, as if the thread was never broken. But the thread is broken, in a sense. The continuous awareness you trust as your life is not actually continuous. It is stitched together across long stretches of unconsciousness. The you who fell asleep last night and the you who woke today are connected mostly by memory, by routine, by the body's quiet persistence. The conscious thread is not one long line, it is more like a series of bright moments, separated by darkness. This is worth holding, because we tend to imagine death as the great breaking of continuity, the end of the thread, and yet we already experience small breakings of continuity, constantly, gracefully, without fear, sleep, anesthesia, deep absorption, the lost hours of a long drive when your mind drifted somewhere else. Each is a small absence we did not mourn. So what makes the largest absence so terrifying? Perhaps simply this: we have not yet woken from it, and the brain is built to trust patterns. It trusts what it has practiced. But here is the soft, careful wondering at the heart of this night. What if dying is not the end of the pattern, but the largest version of the pattern? What if the moment we fear most is not so different in shape from the moments we already pass through every night? The senses dimming, the story softening, the self releasing its grip, and then, instead of returning to the same room, returning to something we cannot yet imagine. We do not know this. No one does. There are many possibilities, and we will hold them all gently as we walk further into this. Some say there is nothing afterward. Some say there is everything. Some say the question itself may be slightly wrong, because what we call dying may not be what we think it is. For tonight, simply let the question rest beside you like a small lamp left on. We will sit with it, not solve it. We have time. There is a moment, sometimes recorded, that scientists were not expecting to find. A flicker in the brain, a wave of activity that should not be there. And it happens not at the height of life, but at its very edge. In a handful of cases, researchers have observed the brains of dying patients in their final seconds. What they saw was strange. Instead of a slow fading into stillness, there was a surge, a burst of high-frequency electrical activity, the kind associated with intense inner experience, a frequency called gamma, which tends to appear when the mind is doing something vivid, remembering, dreaming, connecting, feeling deeply. It is a small finding. The data is limited. The conditions of dying are difficult to study, but the pattern is striking enough that it has captured the quiet attention of neuroscientists around the world, because gamma waves are not the signature of shutting down. They are the signature of something turning on. Let that sit for a moment. At the very edge of a life, the brain does not necessarily fall silent. In some cases, it lights up. What does this mean? Honestly, no one knows. There are careful, cautious explanations. The dying brain is undergoing many changes. Oxygen is failing, chemicals are flooding the system, neurons may fire in unusual patterns simply because the usual constraints have loosened. So the surge could be a kind of biological echo, a final shimmer with no inner meaning at all. But there is another possibility, held gently by some researchers, never claimed as fact. The surge resembles the kind of brain activity that occurs during lucid dreams, deep meditation, and intense recollection. It looks in some ways like the brain doing what it does when it is experiencing something powerfully. So the question rises quietly: what might that experience feel like from the inside, if there is anyone inside to feel it? We cannot answer that. The people who have crossed have not returned to describe it. The closest we have are those who came near and came back, and we will turn to them gently in the next part of our walk. For now, simply notice the shape of this finding. The threshold of death, which we imagine as a flat line, may not be flat at all. It may be a doorway, a bright last note, a surge of inner light at the very moment we assumed the lights were going out. It is hard not to feel a small chill at that, in the best possible way, because it changes the picture. It suggests that whatever dying is, it is not necessarily what we have pictured. It is not necessarily a fading to grey. It may be something stranger, something more luminous, something the brain reaches toward with one final effort. And the gentle, important truth is that we do not have to draw firm conclusions from this. We do not have to believe anything. We can simply let the picture be more open than we thought it was. We can let the edge of life be a little less knowable, a little less final, a little less closed. That openness, all by itself, can be a quiet comfort tonight. Because comfort sometimes comes not from answers, but from realizing that the question is bigger than the fear. Across every culture, across every century, in languages that have nothing in common, people who have come close to death have returned with strangely similar stories. A tunnel, a light, a sense of floating above the body, a presence, warm and welcoming, a review of life unfolding all at once. A peace so deep that the return to ordinary waking sometimes feels like the harder transition. We should hold these reports with care. They are not proof of anything beyond themselves. They are not a map of what dying is. They are, however, real human experiences, and they deserve respectful attention. What is striking is the overlap. A child in one country and an elderly woman in another, with no shared faith, no shared expectations, no shared images of an afterlife, sometimes describe almost the same sequence. That kind of pattern is what scientists notice. Patterns invite explanation. They do not demand a single one. There are calm biological possibilities. As oxygen drops and the brain becomes stressed, the visual cortex may misfire in particular ways. The peripheral vision can dim while the center stays bright, producing something that looks like a tunnel with a light at the end. The temporal lobe, the region tied to deep meaning, memory, and a sense of presence, can become unusually active under such conditions. Stimulating it during certain medical procedures can produce sensations of unseen companions, of a vast benevolence, of a feeling more familiar than memory itself. So, on one hand, a near-death experience may be a particular way the brain behaves under particular stress, a consistent neurological signature written into the same shared hardware we all carry. That would explain why the reports rhyme. Same instrument, same kind of song. On the other hand, even if that explanation is correct, it does not necessarily make the experience less meaningful. It only changes how we describe it. A sunset is light bending through atmosphere. It is also beautiful. The mechanism does not erase the wonder, and there is a quieter possibility, held loosely by some researchers, that the brain near death may briefly perceive something it does not normally perceive, not because it is breaking, but because in some sense it is opening. Some have wondered whether the dying brain is less like a lamp burning out and more like a curtain being drawn aside. We do not know which picture is closer to truth. Probably no one alive does. The respectful answer is to sit between the explanations rather than seize one. But notice this. Across the world, the experience is almost never described as terrifying. It is described as peaceful, expansive, often deeply welcoming. Some return reluctantly. Many are profoundly changed. They become less afraid of dying. They report a softening of priorities, a gentleness toward others, a strange certainty that whatever happens at the end is somehow all right. That in itself is worth carrying with you tonight. Even if we cannot say what these experiences are, we can notice what they are not. They are not the screaming chaos we sometimes fear. They are not, as far as the witnesses can tell, unkind. And maybe, just maybe, the threshold is not what we have been bracing for. Maybe the bracing itself is what has hurt us most. There is a story that survivors of near-death experiences often tell. They say that in those final seconds, time stretched. A moment that should have lasted an instant somehow held an entire ocean of perception. Years, sometimes whole lives, seem to unfold in the space of a heartbeat. You may have felt a smaller version of this yourself. A car suddenly skids. A child stumbles toward a sharp corner. In the breath before something happens, everything slows. Your senses sharpen. Details that should have been a blur become crisp. And later, recounting the moment, you might say, it felt like time stopped. Researchers have looked into this. What they have found is gentle and surprising. It is not that time itself slows, it is that the brain in moments of extreme alertness records more information per second than usual. Memory becomes unusually dense. Later, when you try to recall the event, The sheer richness of the recording makes it feel as if more time passed than really did. The experience was not longer, it was thicker. A small chemical helps make this happen. Norepinephrine, released during sudden danger, sharpens attention and turns up the recording quality of memory. Neurons fire faster, perception widens. The brain, sensing that something important is happening, refuses to miss any of it. Now imagine this same mechanism dialed all the way up in the moments before death. The body knows something is changing. Stress chemistry surges. The brain begins recording with extraordinary care. Reports from those who have nearly died often describe exactly this. A sense that everything mattered, that every detail was held with strange tenderness, that time itself opened wide, like a great quiet hall. This leads to a wondering that some find comforting. We tend to think of dying as a single sudden cliff, a wall we hit, but the brain, if it follows the same pattern it shows in lesser emergencies, may not experience it as a wall at all. From the inside, the last moments might be vast, not short, vast. If a near-fatal slip on icy stairs can feel like a slow ballet of falling, what might the genuine final crossing feel like? A few seconds by the clock. Yet, from inside the brain, perhaps something much wider, something we could not measure even if we tried. There is a soft hint here. The clock and the inner experience are not the same thing. The seconds you read on a watch are not the seconds your awareness lives through. The relationship is loose, it can stretch, it can bend. It already does in small ways throughout your ordinary life. You have lived this. The minutes of a dull meeting drag. The hours of a deep conversation vanish. The afternoons of childhood seemed endless. The years of adulthood feel quick. Time is not a fixed river running at one speed. It is more like water that takes the shape of the mind holding it. So when we wonder about the moment of dying, perhaps we should not imagine it as a sudden cut. Perhaps we should imagine it as something that, from inside, has its own quiet duration. Long enough, maybe, for everything that matters to be felt. Long enough for whatever is supposed to happen gently. Almost everyone who has come close to dying and returned mentions one strange thing. The life review. The sudden unfolding, overwhelming experience of seeing one's life again. Not as a montage, not as highlights, as something more total. Every face, every choice, every moment of small kindness or small cruelty, sometimes felt not only from your own point of view, but from the points of view of everyone you touched. This is one of the most consistent themes across these reports, and it is one of the most beautiful and one of the most haunting. What might be happening in soft biological terms? The brain has a region called the hippocampus, deep in the temporal lobe, which is closely involved in storing and retrieving memories. Throughout your life, it has been quietly cataloguing experience, weaving narratives, linking faces to feelings, places to meanings. It is one of the busiest, most patient parts of your inner architecture. Researchers studying the dying process have wondered what happens when this system is suddenly destabilized, when oxygen drops, when stress chemistry floods the system, when normal regulation loosens. The memory system may begin discharging in unusual patterns. Long-term archives may light up at once. Connections that normally lie dormant may fire together. The brain, in some sense, may briefly become a vast, simultaneous library opening every book it has. If that is even partly true, then the life review is not a movie someone is showing you. It is something more intimate. It is your own memory, finally allowed to run without the usual filters, the usual order, the usual privacy. Everything you ever recorded, available all at once. Imagine that gently. Imagine that nothing was truly lost. The day you have forgotten, the face you have not thought about in decades, the small moment in a doorway when someone smiled at you, the quiet evenings you thought were ordinary, all of it kept somewhere by the slow, patient work of the hippocampus and its many helpers. Even in ordinary life, this is true to a degree. Long-buried memories can resurface with a smell, a song, a particular slant of afternoon light. The mind is far more retentive than we usually feel. We forget, mostly, in the sense of being unable to access on demand. We forget less than we think we do. Now stretch that capacity to its extreme. Stretch it to the moment when the usual constraints are loosened. The hint is that whatever you have lived may not be as lost as it sometimes feels. Whatever has shaped you may still be there, quietly, even if your conscious self cannot reach it tonight. Some have found enormous comfort in this. The fear of forgetting our loved ones, of losing the texture of our days, can be one of the quietest aches of being human. To consider that the brain holds more than it shows, and may, at its final threshold, hold everything at once, softens something in us. We do not need to commit to any particular interpretation of this. We only need to notice the possibility that the story of your life is not slipping away from you as fast as you fear, that somewhere inside, the cinema is still recording, gently, and one day perhaps will play. Sit with this for a moment. The thing you call you, the sense of being a person, separate from the world, looking out from behind your eyes, the little voice inside that says, I am here, I am the one experiencing this. We treat it as the most solid thing we know, and yet it may be one of the most delicate. In certain states, this boundary thins. People who have meditated for many years sometimes describe a quiet falling away of the self. Not death, not unconsciousness, just the dissolving of the line between themselves and everything else. The room remains, the breath remains, but the person watching, in that ordinary sense, has softened into something larger. Something similar appears, more dramatically, in reports from those who have experienced near-death events, or who have taken certain mind-altering substances under careful conditions. The self loosens, the edges blur, there is a sense of merging with something vast, and surprisingly often, the experience is described not as terrifying, but as peaceful, as if the self had been a tight grip held all along, and now briefly it had let go. How might the brain do this? One quiet clue lies in the default mode network, that loose constellation of regions we touched on earlier, the part of the brain that hums when you daydream, remember yourself, imagine the future, replay the past. It is in many ways the neural correspondent of the inner narrator, the voice that keeps saying, "This is me." Studies have noticed that when this network grows quieter, the sense of self tends to soften with it. Long-term meditators show reduced activity there during deep practice. Certain compounds reliably suppress its activity, and in near-death conditions, when the brain is under extreme stress, this region may also become unusually quiet. When the narrator goes silent, something else seems to be heard. What is heard when the inner narrator quiets? People describe it many ways: a vast openness, a sense of being part of something, a quiet, weightless awareness without a clear owner. The words always fall short. Language was built by the self to describe the world. It struggles to describe what happens when the self steps aside. Hold this softly, because it reframes one of our deepest fears. The fear of dying is in many ways the fear of losing the self, the fear that the I will end. But if the self is something the brain assembles, and if the brain has multiple ways of letting that assembly loosen without producing terror, then the dissolving of self may not be the violent thing we imagine. It may be a release the system already knows how to perform. This is not a claim that death is gentle. It is a small, careful noticing that the self is not as solid as it seems, and that its softening is not always painful. In fact, in many reported cases, the softening is the most peaceful experience a human being can have. So perhaps the thing we cling to most fiercely is, paradoxically, the thing best practiced at letting go. Perhaps the boundary of self, which feels like a wall, is closer to a mist, visible from a distance. Soft to the touch when you arrive, step back for a moment and look at what we have been seeing. The same shape has appeared in several different places, and the resemblance is hard to ignore. In sleep onset, the senses dim, the self softens, and awareness slips into something the mind cannot later describe. In deep meditation, the senses remain, but the self thins, and awareness opens into something quieter than thought. In anesthesia, time itself seems to vanish, and the person reports nothing at all, as if a piece of life simply was not lived from the inside. In near-death experiences, the self loosens, time stretches, and a vast openness sometimes arrives. In dreams, the self continues, but the world it lives in is built entirely from the inside. These are very different states. They have different triggers, different brain signatures, different durations, different consequences, and yet gently they share something. In each one, the ordinary fabric of waking experience comes apart in some way. The thalamus closes a door, the default mode network grows quiet, the boundary of self shifts, something releases. It is almost as if consciousness has many off-ramps, many ways of stepping out of the daytime version of itself, as if the brain, which we tend to imagine as a single steady producer of one steady stream of experience, is really a versatile instrument capable of producing many kinds of inner weather. And once you notice the pattern, it is hard not to wonder, if the brain has so many natural exits from the ordinary self, what does that tell us about the ordinary self? Perhaps it tells us that the daytime version is not the whole truth. Perhaps it is one mode among many, a mode well suited to walking through grocery stores and finishing emails. Not necessarily a mode that captures everything we are. Some have proposed that these states might be glimpses of a deeper continuum, that waking life, sleep, dream, meditation, near-death, and other altered states are all places on a long spectrum the brain can wander. We tend to live in one narrow band, but other bands are there. Sometimes we visit, sometimes they visit us. This wandering does not require any particular belief. It simply changes how we think about the moment of dying. If dying is yet another way that the ordinary self steps aside, then we already have many small experiences that rhyme with it. We are not as unfamiliar with this kind of transition as we sometimes feel. The brain, our quiet partner in being alive, has practiced softening, releasing, dissolving in many directions. Whatever the final crossing is, it is not entirely foreign to us. It echoes things we have already done. This is one of the quiet comforts of this whole long walk. Not certainty, not answers, just the noticing that the shape of what we fear may resemble shapes we have already lived inside, without harm, and sometimes with great peace. And so we move forward gently into the next part of the question. Not what happens at the end, but what carries through. Whether anything carries through at all, and what it might mean to ask such a thing without grasping for a final answer. Here is a quiet puzzle that almost no one stops to notice. Each night you fall asleep. For hours, the person you call yourself simply is not there in any familiar sense. Your name, your worries, your face in the mirror, all of it slips out of awareness. And yet every morning you wake up and assume, without hesitation, that you are the same person who lay down the night before. But are you? Strictly speaking, much has changed. Cells in your body have died and been replaced. Neurons have rewired in small, patient ways. New memories have settled. Old ones have shifted slightly in tone. The version of you who closed their eyes is not, in any rigorous sense, identical to the version waking now. And yet, there is no hesitation in recognizing yourself. The continuity feels complete. Why? Because the brain is extraordinarily good at telling the story of you across gaps. Throughout the night, even as awareness fades, certain processes hum on quietly. The hippocampus, that gentle archivist, sorts the day's experiences. Connections strengthen. The neural pattern that represents your sense of self is preserved across the dark hours, ready to be picked up again at first light. What you experience as waking is, in part, a reloading. The brain restores the file of you. Memory ties this morning to last night, last week, last year. You step into the story already in progress, and it feels seamless because the story has remained. Pause on the strangeness of this. The self you trust as a continuous thread is not actually continuous in experience. It is reconstructed, built fresh in some sense each morning, from raw materials the night left in place. This is one of the oldest puzzles in philosophy. The ancient thinkers asked how you could be the same person across years of change, and the modern thinkers ask how you can be the same person across hours of unconsciousness. The honest answer is that there is no simple physical fact that makes you the same. There is only continuity of pattern, of memory, of body, of the slow river of self that the brain keeps weaving. Now consider what this means for the larger question. If your continuity across sleep depends not on uninterrupted experience, but on the preservation of pattern, then what we usually call death might be looked at in a slightly different way. It is, at its core, the disruption of the pattern. The body can no longer maintain the weaving, and so the version of you that depends on that weaving cannot continue in the form we know. But notice the wording. The form we know. Whether anything beyond that form continues, in any sense, is not a question biology can fully answer. It can only describe what happens to the weaving. It cannot fully describe what, if anything, was being woven. This is not a hidden argument for any particular afterlife. It is simply a careful noticing that personal continuity is, even in life, a kind of beautiful trick the brain performs every night. And tricks, of course, are not the same as illusions. The you who reads this is real. The continuity matters. The story is loved by the storyteller, but the story is also gentler, more fragile, more wondrous than we usually feel. There is a question that quietly sits at the heart of consciousness science. We do not yet have a settled answer for it. Possibly we never will, but the way you hold this question gently changes how you hold everything we have explored. The question is this: is the brain like a lamp, generating consciousness as light is generated from a bulb? Or is the brain more like a radio, receiving consciousness from somewhere else and tuning it into something we can hear? On one hand, the lamp view. Most contemporary neuroscience leans towards something like it. The brain, in this picture, is the source of experience. Neurons fire, networks coordinate, certain patterns produce awareness. When the brain is damaged, experience is altered. When it stops, experience presumably stops too. There is a great deal of evidence that physical changes in the brain correlate very tightly with changes in what we feel and perceive. Disrupt a small region with a careful procedure, and a person can stop recognizing faces, or stop perceiving the left side of space, or stop knowing they are sad. The brain seems to matter deeply to consciousness in every way we can measure. On the other hand, the radio view, much older, sometimes whispered by philosophers and a few thoughtful scientists, holds that the brain may not be the producer of consciousness so much as its instrument. In this picture, awareness exists in some sense beyond any single brain, and each brain tunes a slice of it into a particular life, a particular point of view. When the radio breaks, the music does not necessarily vanish, it simply can no longer be played through that device. Both pictures are compatible with much of the data. Both have thoughtful defenders. Both have unsettled regions. Neither is something we can prove. There are also views that sit between them. Some thinkers have proposed what is called integrated information theory. It tries to identify exactly what kinds of physical systems generate experience. It suggests that any system that integrates information in certain ways may have some degree of awareness, however faint. In that view, consciousness is more widespread than we usually think, and the human brain is just an especially intense version of something more general. Other models lean differently. They argue that consciousness emerges only in very specific arrangements, that not everything that processes information is aware, and that the human brain is doing something rare and possibly unique in this corner of the universe. The honest situation is that we do not know which view, if any, is correct. The question of how matter gives rise to inner experience is sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness, and it has earned that name. After all our progress, we still cannot explain why there is any inner light at all, why processing a signal should feel like anything rather than nothing. This uncertainty is not a flaw in your understanding. It is the actual state of the field. So when we wonder what happens at death, we are wondering inside a question we have not solved even for life. Whether the lamp is extinguished, or the radio is silenced while the broadcast continues, or something else entirely takes place, is not knowable from where we sit tonight. What we can know is this: the question is alive, and the mystery, far from being closed, is wider than we usually feel. There is a strange kind of disappearance that many of us have already experienced, and most of us have barely thought about it since. It is general anesthesia, the kind given before surgery. You lie down on a table, a mask is placed over your face, or a small needle slipped into your arm. The doctor counts down from 10, and somewhere between 9 and 7, you are simply gone. When you come back, you do not feel as if you have slept. You do not have dreams to recall. There is no sense of time having passed inside you. There is just a cut. The room dims, and then, in what feels like the same instant, the room is brighter and you are being told the operation is over. Hours have elapsed. Inside you, nothing did. People sometimes describe this as the most peaceful experience of their lives. Others find it unsettling afterward because of how completely it removed them. There was no dream, no continuity, no slow drifting, just a gap where you were not. This is different from ordinary sleep. In sleep, even though you may not remember it, the brain is doing many things. It cycles through stages, it dreams, it consolidates memory. The lights are low, but the building is still active. Anesthesia is closer to switching the building off. Modern science is still working out exactly how it works. Different anesthetic drugs act on different molecular targets, but they share a tendency to disrupt the communication between brain regions, especially the kind of large-scale integration that some researchers think is essential to consciousness. When that integration falls below a certain threshold, the inner light, whatever it is, seems to go out. This is one of the most direct demonstrations we have that consciousness depends, in some way, on the brain's coordination. Damage that coordination enough, even temporarily, and there is no inner experience to report. The lamp is dimmed, the radio is unplugged. We cannot tell which picture is correct from this evidence alone, but anesthesia also teaches something gentler. It shows that the absence of experience is not the same as suffering. The hours in which you were not there were not painful. They were not anything. You did not lie in some dark room of inner terror, waiting to be called back. There was no waiting. There was no you to wait. For many people, this is one of the strangest considerations to hold, because we tend to imagine the absence of self as a kind of darkness, a long, frightening night without end. But darkness still has a quality. Anesthesia has no quality. It is not even silent, because silence requires someone to hear it. And so this gives us a quiet, careful point. Whatever the absence of experience is, it is not in itself a thing we suffer through. Suffering requires a sufferer. If consciousness is truly extinguished, there is no one home to find this distressing. If, on the other hand, something continues, in some form we cannot yet describe, then the gap we fear is also not what we picture. Either way, the picture in our heads of being trapped, alone, conscious of nothing, is almost certainly the one possibility that the situation cannot actually be. This by itself is a soft and unexpected comfort. Some people, sometimes by accident, sometimes by careful practice, become aware that they are dreaming while still inside the dream. This is called lucid dreaming. Picture it for a moment. You are walking through a strange landscape, doing something nonsensical, perhaps speaking with someone long gone, and a small calm thought rises. This is a dream. The realization does not always wake you up. Sometimes the dream continues, and now you are walking through it with a different kind of awareness. The colors may sharpen, the freedom may widen. You may decide to fly, to revisit a place, to look at the details more closely. You are still in the dream world, but you know it is a dream world. What is happening in the brain when this occurs? Researchers studying lucid dreamers have noticed that during these episodes, certain regions of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain associated with self-reflection and reasoning, become more active than they usually are during REM sleep. Ordinarily, those regions go quiet during dreaming, which is partly why dreams are so accepting of impossible things. When they reactivate, awareness of the dream's nature becomes possible. So in lucid dreaming, two things happen at once. You are inside a constructed world, generated by your own mind, and you are aware that the world is constructed. Both states coexist. The dream does not end because you know it is a dream. It simply becomes a more conscious version of itself. This is a remarkable possibility because it suggests that awareness and construction are not opposites. You can be inside an entirely invented experience while knowing, calmly, that it is invented. The knowledge does not destroy the experience. It only changes your relationship to it. Now hold this gently next to the larger question. If we have spent any time wondering whether ordinary waking life might itself be a kind of constructed experience, the lucid dreamer offers a small, hopeful clue. It is possible to notice, from the inside, that what you are experiencing is being shaped by the mind. It is possible to wake up within without waking up out of. Many contemplative traditions have spoken about this kind of waking. They suggest that there is a way of being present in ordinary life that is more vivid, more attentive, more aware of the constructedness of perception without rejecting the experience itself. They describe it in different ways with different vocabularies, but the common thread is the lucid dreamer's posture. Yes, this is happening, and yes, I am here, and something in me knows there is more to this than the surface. We are not making any large claim. We are only noticing the pattern. The brain has demonstrated repeatedly that there are degrees of awareness inside experience. There are levels at which one can know that one is experiencing. There are moments when even a dream becomes a place of insight, and so the soft wondering becomes this. If a person can become lucid inside a dream, can a person become lucid inside a life? Not by stepping outside it, not by escaping, simply by noticing more. By holding the strangeness of being here with a kind of quiet attention. Perhaps that small practice is one of the gentlest preparations for whatever the final waking turns out to be. Not a hunt for answers, just a softening into noticing. We come now to the edges of what science can say with confidence. Beyond these edges, some thoughtful people have offered tentative ideas. Most are speculative, all are debated, none should be taken as settled. But they are worth a gentle look, because they show how widely thinkers have stretched in search of a fuller picture. One direction explores whether the strange physics of the very small might have anything to do with consciousness. The world we know on small scales does not behave like the world of furniture and clocks. Particles can exist in mixtures of possibilities, only settling into one outcome when measured. The boundaries between things are not as clean as they seem. Some physicists and mathematicians have wondered, quietly, whether the brain might harness some of this strangeness. They have proposed that consciousness may involve processes more subtle than ordinary chemistry. These ideas are not mainstream, and they remain contested. Many researchers find them unconvincing, others find them suggestive. The honest position is that we do not know. Why mention these speculative ideas at all? Not to claim them as fact, only to notice that even within careful scientific thought, the door has not been firmly closed on the possibility that consciousness has dimensions we have not fully mapped. We are not standing in a complete picture of how mind and matter relate. We are standing inside an open question, with very smart people exploring different corners of it. Another direction is biocentric thinking. Some have proposed that life and consciousness may play a larger role in the structure of reality than we usually assume. In these views, the universe and the conscious observer are not as separate as they look. Consciousness might be woven into the fabric of things in a way our current models do not yet describe. Again, these are minority views. They are not proven, they are not consensus, but they exist as serious proposals raised by people who have thought about these problems for many years. What is the value of looking at these speculative ideas tonight? Only this. They remind us that the certainty with which we sometimes treat the question of consciousness and its end is not really justified by the present state of knowledge. We do not know what consciousness is. We do not fully know how it arises from matter. We do not know whether anything about it persists beyond the body, in any sense. The honest, intellectually humble position is open. This is important because cultures often slide into one of two extremes. One extreme insists that science has settled the matter and that nothing continues. Another extreme insists that we know in detail what continues and what it looks like. The truth in the middle is harder to hold. We genuinely do not know. The mystery is not a gap to be filled in tomorrow. It may be a feature of where we stand. These threads of speculation do not break cleanly. They do not give us a tidy picture, but they leave us with a useful kind of openness. The strict materialist tonight cannot fully prove their view. The strict spiritualist cannot fully prove theirs. What we can do is sit, with respect, in the not knowing, and let it be a place of curiosity rather than fear. These models attempt to explain how things work. They do not necessarily explain why anything exists at all. Some questions remain quietly larger than every model we have built. There is something quietly remarkable that has been happening in the past few decades, almost without anyone outside the field noticing. In quiet laboratories, scientists have been wiring up the heads of long-time meditators and watching what happens inside while these people sit, eyes closed, breathing softly. What the monitors show has surprised many researchers. The brain of an experienced meditator at rest, especially during deep practice, looks different from an ordinary brain at rest. Certain rapid patterns of activity become stronger. The default mode network, the constellation we have been visiting all night, often grows quieter. Connections between regions shift. The whole instrument seems to tune itself differently. This becomes more interesting when you compare these laboratory descriptions to the way contemplative traditions have described inner experience for centuries. Long before any monitor existed, people sitting in caves, monasteries, forests, and small rooms reported similar things: a loosening of the sense of self, a widening of awareness, a peace that was not the absence of feeling but the presence of something steadier than feeling. The mystics described in poetry what the monitors now describe in patterns. This convergence is striking. Two very different ways of looking at the inner world, one from the outside, one from the inside, arriving at compatible portraits, not identical portraits. They use different languages and aim at different ends, but they overlap. One interpretation is gentle and modest. Long meditative practice changes the brain in measurable ways, and the inner experiences described by contemplatives are exactly the kind of inner experiences that brains in those measurable states would naturally produce. The mystics were excellent observers of their own minds. The monitors are simply confirming what they noticed. This does not diminish what the mystics described. It does not say the experiences were not real. It says the experiences were real, and now we have a second way of seeing them, from a different angle. Both are partial views of the same delicate territory. Another interpretation held by some goes further. They suggest that contemplative practice may not only change the brain, but allow access to layers of awareness that ordinary daily life rarely touches, layers that, perhaps, have always been there, quiet behind the noise. We do not need to commit that interpretation. It is one possibility among others. The point is simply that careful, repeated, disciplined attention to one's own mind tends to reveal more than most of us suspect is there. Notice what is being suggested. Awareness is something you can practice, not because it is created by practice, but because practice changes which parts of awareness are available to you. The ordinary busy daytime mind is one mode. The quieter, more spacious mind that emerges after long stillness is another. And the difference is not imagined. It can be seen on the monitors. This matters for the question we have been holding, because it suggests that the boundaries of consciousness, even within a single life, are more flexible than we usually assume. If a single brain can, with effort, learn to enter quite different inner states, then the picture of consciousness as a fixed thing becomes harder to defend. It is more like a landscape with many regions, most of which most of us never visit, and so we begin to suspect that what waits at the end of life is at least as varied as what is already present, quietly, in the borderlands of awareness we have not yet walked. You have probably had nights when, in the morning, you remembered a dream so vividly you could almost taste it, and other nights when you woke convinced you had not dreamed at all. Sleep researchers have a small but slightly unsettling answer to that second case. You almost certainly did dream, you just do not remember. On any given night, the average sleeper passes through several cycles of REM sleep, the stage in which most vivid dreaming occurs. Studies in which people are awakened directly from REM consistently find that they were, just moments ago, in the middle of some experience, a conversation, a place, a feeling. And yet, if those same people are allowed to drift back into ordinary sleep and then woken naturally hours later, most of those experiences are gone, vanished, as if they had never been. Think about what this means. Every night you live through experiences. They are intense enough that, while inside them they feel real. People talk, landscapes unfold, stories happen, and then, on waking, all of it dissolves. The mind discards entire lifetimes worth of inner footage, every single night, and you barely notice the loss. This is not a glitch. It seems to be how memory works. The hippocampus, the gentle archivist we have visited before, is more selective than we sometimes feel. It writes some experiences to long-term storage and lets others slip away. Dreams, for reasons researchers are still debating, often fall into the slip-away category, unless something jolts you awake while they are still warm in your mind. Now consider what this implies gently. If your mind can produce a great deal of experience and then erase the memory of it without harming you, then memory is not the same as experience. The you who had the dream really had it. The you who wakes does not remember. Both are versions of you. The thread of identity continues, but the experience is no longer accessible. This loosens something. We tend to identify our inner life with what we can recall. We treat memory as the marker of selfhood, but your nightly amnesia for dreaming suggests that you may already be having far more experience than the conscious daytime self knows about. There are unremembered selves, in a sense, inside you. Versions of you that lived through dreams the morning version cannot reach. This is not a haunting idea. It is a soft, expansive one. It suggests that the self we walk around with is a partial portrait, not the whole gallery. There may be much more to who you are than what you can describe over coffee. And this matters for the larger question, because one of our deepest fears about the end of life is the fear of losing what we know about ourselves. The fear that the rich inner texture of being us will simply vanish. Yet a great deal of that texture already vanishes regularly each morning, and we live well without it. The continuity of self does not seem to depend on remembering every experience. It depends on something subtler. So perhaps when we wonder about the final crossing, we should remember that we have already crossed thousands of small crossings of forgetting. We have already practiced surviving the loss of inner episodes. Whatever comes after a life of quietly being more than we remembered, and the remembering, while precious, is not the whole of who we are. Most of the time, the world feels solid, real, convincingly here. You walk into a room, and the room is simply a room. The light, the air, the small sounds of the house all behave as expected. You do not have to verify that any of it is happening. You simply live inside it. But almost everyone at some point has had a moment when this solidness slipped. Maybe you were standing somewhere ordinary, and the world briefly felt as if it were staged. The colors looked correct, the people looked correct, and yet a quiet voice inside whispered, "This all seems a little off." Or maybe you stepped into a place you had never been, and felt the bone-deep certainty that you had been there before, down to the angle of a window or the sound of someone's voice. Or maybe you had a fleeting sense that you were watching your own life from a small distance, as if the experiencer and the lived experience had briefly separated. These small slips have names: derealization, déjà vu, depersonalization. They are common, especially in tired or stressed minds. Most are harmless, most pass quickly, and most are gone before we think much about them. But they are worth noticing, because they are tiny tears in the curtain of ordinary perception. Researchers studying these experiences have often turned their attention to the temporal lobes, the regions running along the sides of the brain just above the ears. These regions are involved, among many other things, in tagging experience as familiar, as real, as present. When their activity wavers slightly, the tagging can wobble. A new place can briefly feel like an old one. An old place can feel suddenly unfamiliar. The world can lose its sticker that says, "This is happening now." In other words, reality is not just out there. The sense that what you are perceiving is real is itself a kind of label that the brain attaches to incoming experience. When the label slips, the experience does not stop. The room is still there, the people are still there, but the certainty that any of it is solidly happening loosens just for a moment, and we are reminded that the labels are not the same as the things being labeled. This is a strange and humbling observation. The feeling of reality is part of the construction. It is one of the brain's gifts to you, a way of making the daily world feel anchored. Without it, life would be exhausting, full of doubt, impossible to walk through. With it, life feels naturally trustworthy. But what this also means is that we cannot fully rely on the feeling of reality to tell us what is real. The feeling is a guide, not a guarantee. Sometimes the feeling fails when nothing in the world has actually changed. Sometimes the world does change without the feeling registering it. How does this connect to the long question of dying and waking? Gently like this. If even the feeling that the ordinary day is real is something the brain assembles, then we should be careful before assuming that the ordinary day is the most fundamental layer. There may be other layers, with other kinds of reality tags that we sometimes brush against in unusual moments. The world we know may be one solidly tagged map among other possible maps. Tonight, we do not need to choose between them. We only need to notice that the certainty of the everyday is, itself, a quiet kind of gift. Try something small with me. Notice that you are aware of what is happening right now. The sound of these words, the feeling of your body, the quiet around you. Now notice that you are noticing. Did you feel that shift? There is something strange about it. There is you experiencing, and then there is something else, aware of you experiencing. And if you sit with it carefully, you can sometimes feel a third layer, watching the second. You can keep stepping back, like a quiet hall of mirrors, and the observer always seems to be a little further inside than you can quite reach. Researchers who study this have a name for it: metacognition. Thinking about thinking, awareness of awareness. It is one of the most remarkable features of the human mind, and it is also one of the most puzzling. We do not really know how it is possible. Most things in the universe simply happen. A river flows without knowing it flows. A storm does its work without watching itself. But somehow, in human minds, there is something extra. There is a watcher. What is the watcher? It is tempting to say it is just another process in the brain. That is probably part of the answer. Particular regions of the prefrontal cortex are very active when people reflect on their own thoughts. Damage those regions, and a person's ability to know what they are thinking can become muddled. So in some way, the watcher seems to have biological correlates, like everything else we have looked at tonight. And yet, the puzzle does not fully dissolve. Because however many layers of brain processes we describe, there is still the small, soft fact that something feels like it is being observed. The watcher is not just a process. It is, somehow, the experience of watching. And explaining how a physical process becomes an experience is, as we touched on before, one of the deepest unsolved problems in modern thought. Philosophers sometimes call this the hard problem of consciousness. It is the question of why there is anything it is like to be you, why your brain does not simply process information silently, the way a calculator does, but instead generates an inside, a quiet space of feeling and noticing. We have many partial answers. We do not have a complete one. This matters tonight because the watcher is what we are most worried about losing. When we fear the end of life, we are mostly fearing the end of this small inner observer. Not the body, not the memories exactly, the witness, the one who has been quietly here through all of it. And so it is worth noticing that we do not fully know what this witness is, even in life. We have not pinned it down. We have not exhausted its strangeness. To assume confidently that we know what becomes of it at the end is, perhaps, asking too much of our current understanding. Better, maybe, to hold the witness with a soft kind of wonder, to notice that the most familiar thing in your life, the one that has been with you constantly, the inner light that has watched every moment, is in many ways the deepest mystery you carry. You have lived inside a question every single day, and the question is not less interesting for not having an answer. Sometimes, late at night, a small, almost dizzying thought drifts in. It goes something like this. Out of all the things this universe could have been, somehow it became a place where parts of it look up and wonder about the whole. Stars do not wonder. Mountains do not wonder. Most of the cosmos seems to roll on without anyone watching. And yet, here, in a soft mind, on a small planet, awareness has opened its eyes. Why? We do not know. This may be one of the questions we cannot answer from inside the system, but it is worth sitting with gently before we settle further into the night. One way of looking at it goes like this. Consciousness emerged because, given enough time and the right conditions, complex systems can give rise to surprising properties. Matter, arranging itself into nervous systems, eventually became capable of representing the world, then of representing itself within the world. Awareness, in this view, is something the universe became capable of producing in particular pockets, once the ingredients were right. This is a beautiful idea on its own terms. It does not necessarily explain everything. It does not by itself tell us why inner experience exists rather than just inner processing, but it suggests that we are not as separate from the rest of the cosmos as we feel. We are made of star stuff, as one famous astronomer once put it, and that star stuff has, after billions of years, begun to look back at itself. Some thinkers have proposed something gentler still. They have wondered whether some seed of experience may be more widespread in nature than we usually assume. Not human consciousness, of course, not awareness as we know it, but some faint analogue, some primitive quality of feeling, present in much simpler systems, building up to richer forms in more complex ones. These ideas are sometimes called panpsychist proposals. They are not consensus, they are not proven. They are simply one way some careful thinkers have tried to soften the gap between mind and matter. It is also entirely possible that this universe is the result of something far beyond any of our current models, including models that try to make it self-sufficient. Many people, across cultures and centuries, have felt that the deepest origin of things may lie outside what any equation can capture. That is a respectful possibility too. It is not the kind of thing science can confirm or deny. It belongs to a different mode of asking. What can be said, with some quiet confidence, is this. The fact that this universe contains awareness at all is one of its most remarkable features. The fact that we, made of the same material as everything else, can sit in a small room and wonder about the meaning of our own existence is not a small thing. It is one of the strangest gifts in the whole of nature. Hold that for a moment. The cosmos, in some sense, sees itself through your eyes, hears itself through your ears, thinks about itself through your mind. Whatever the deepest reason for this is, it is happening, right now, as you lie here. It would be hard to call that meaningless. It would be hard to feel ordinary knowing that. And so, even before we begin to settle towards sleep, the journey carries this with it. Not certainty, not answers, but a quiet acknowledgement that to be aware at all is already something extraordinary. Across almost every language, in almost every age, people have reached for the same image when speaking of death. They have called it a sleep. They have called it a final rest. They have described the dead as fallen asleep, gone to their rest, in repose. In some traditions, the place of the dead is even named with words tied directly to slumber. Notice how often this metaphor returns. It returns in poetry, in prayer, in everyday speech, in the soft whispers of those grieving. It returns in the elegies of ancient writers and in modern eulogies. It crosses cultures that never met each other. It crosses centuries that share almost nothing else. And it persists even today, in mostly secular speech, when someone says of a loved one, "They have gone to sleep at last." This persistence is not nothing. Human minds have many images they could use for death. They could speak of it as breaking, as ending, as falling, as fading, and those images are used sometimes, but the image of sleep keeps returning, generation after generation, with a tenacity that suggests something deep. Why? One simple possibility is comfort. Sleep is gentle, familiar, mostly painless. Calling death asleep softens the sharp edge of it. It allows people to speak of unbearable things in bearable ways. That alone is enough to explain a lot of the metaphor's appeal. But there may be something more, something a little stranger, hidden in the choice. Sleep is not actually just an ending. It is, every single time, a transition between two waking states. It is something you go into, knowing you will come out. The metaphor of sleep does not really mean nothingness. It means a pause that is eventually followed by a return. When humans across the world reach for this image, they may be quietly expressing a structural hope, a sense that whatever death is, it might rhyme with the only sleep we have known, a pause, a softening, and then perhaps something more. We do not have to assume this rhyme is correct. We may simply notice that the human mind, given many possible metaphors for the end of life, has consistently chosen one that opens a door rather than closes one. That choice is worth considering. It may be a coincidence of language. It may be a wisdom older than language. It is also possible that the metaphor reflects something the mind already knows deeply about its own nightly rhythms. We have rehearsed letting go over and over. We have lived through countless small endings of ourselves into sleep. We have always returned. The metaphor may carry forward, without our consent, the felt sense of those returnings, as if the body, even when speaking of death, cannot help reaching for the familiar arc of waking after rest. Hold this gently. We are not arguing that death is sleep. We are not arguing that anything in particular comes after. We are simply pointing at a deep, near-universal human gesture. When facing the unknown, our species, across thousands of years, has reached almost reflexively for the image of a pause that ends in waking. That may not be evidence of anything beyond ourselves, but it is evidence of something within us, some quiet, persistent suspicion that the largest threshold may, in its shape, echo the smallest one we cross every night. We come, gently, to the edge of imagination. We have walked together through what science has found, what mystics have described, what the dying brain seems to do in its final moments, and what so many quiet traditions have whispered. Now we stand for a while at a soft cliff where firm knowledge falls away and only careful wondering remains. What might be waiting? We do not know. We need to begin by saying this clearly. No one walking this earth tonight has crossed and returned in a way that gives us a verified map. The reports of those who came close are precious, but they are reports from the threshold, not from the country beyond it. Yet some have wondered, in many cultures and centuries, what a vaster awareness might feel like. They have leaned on hints from their own deepest contemplative states. They have leaned on the testimonies of those near death. They have leaned on the strange shapes our minds take when they go quiet. From these, a kind of soft, common imagery emerges. It is often described as a widening rather than a narrowing, as if the small, busy self we walk around with were one room in a much larger house, and stepping out of the room revealed how vast the house had always been. Many speak of an extraordinary peace, beyond the narrow peace we sometimes touch on a good day. Many speak of a sense of belonging, as if they had always been part of something they only now noticed. Researchers studying long-time meditators have heard echoes of this in their interviews. The very experienced ones sometimes describe states in which the boundary of self softens completely, and what remains is not emptiness but a kind of quiet fullness, a spaciousness, an awareness without an obvious owner. It is by all reports not frightening. Often it is the most cherished experience of their lives. Imagine gently that something like this is one possibility waiting at the end. We are not saying it is the truth. We are saying it is among the possibilities that thoughtful, careful people, looking from very different angles, have arrived at. Other possibilities exist too. Some hold that what waits is something specific and structured, defined by particular traditions of belief. Some hold that what waits is simply the absence of experience, with no one home to know the absence. Some hold that the question itself is shaped wrong, and the right framing will only become clear from the other side, if there is another side. What seems wise tonight is not to insist on any single picture. The honest stance is to allow the variety of possibilities to coexist, and to notice that across them, one element keeps returning: a softening, a peace, a release of the small, tight self. Even among the very different stories, this gentleness recurs. So if you are lying here wondering what might be waiting, perhaps the truest thing we can offer is this: whatever it is, the witnesses who have brushed closest to it almost never describe it as hostile. They describe a kindness, a wideness, a something rather than a nothing. And while we cannot promise this, we can hold it as a possibility that has been offered again and again by serious minds across the long quiet of human history. If you have ever lain awake worrying about death, you know how heavy that fear can feel. It is one of the oldest, deepest aches in the human heart. The not wanting to end, the not wanting those we love to end, the quiet panic that sometimes rises at 3 a.m. when there is nothing to do but feel small under the immense sky. Researchers who study this fear have noticed something interesting. The intensity of it varies enormously across people, and even within the same person at different times. Some hold it lightly, some carry it like a stone in the chest, and the difference is not always about belief. Sometimes the most religious are deeply afraid, and the most secular are surprisingly serene. The shape of the fear is more about how one holds the question than what one answers. There is a small field called terror management research, which looks at how thoughts of death subtly influence behavior. It has found that even brief, unconscious reminders of mortality can shape choices in ways we rarely notice. We become slightly more defensive, more attached to our identities, more invested in the structures we feel make us matter. Death is so loud, even when whispered, that the mind quietly reorganizes itself around the whisper. But notice this: much of that reorganizing is driven by a particular picture of death, a picture of erasure, a picture of nothingness experienced as a personal disaster. The fear feeds on that picture. What happens gently when the picture changes? We have spent this long walk softly questioning that picture. We have noticed that the boundaries of self are more fluid than we thought, that the brain near death may surge with vivid activity rather than fall silent, that the absence of experience, if it occurs, is not something anyone suffers, because there would be no sufferer. That metaphors of sleep and waking persist across cultures for reasons that may not be accidental. None of this proves that nothing painful happens at the end. None of this guarantees a particular outcome, but it gently widens the picture. It allows the imagination to hold more than one story at the same time. And when the picture widens, the fear often loosens, not because the fear is solved, but because it has more room to breathe. The amygdala, the small almond-shaped region tied to alarm and threat, fires hardest when it has fixed on a single sharp interpretation of danger. When alternative interpretations enter, when softer possibilities are allowed to coexist, the alarm tends to quiet. We are still mortal, we still grieve, but the grip of dread can lighten. This is one of the quiet gifts of letting the mystery remain a mystery, rather than collapsing it into the worst possibility. You do not have to believe anything new. You only have to allow that you do not know exactly what comes, and that, given what we have seen tonight, the worst pictures may not even be the most likely ones. A loosening of fear is not the same as denial. It is not pretending we will not die. It is acknowledging that we do not know, and that within that not knowing, there is more room than the fear suggests, perhaps even, sometimes, room to rest. Here is a small, slightly humbling observation. Many of us spend much of our waking lives only barely awake. You know the feeling. You drive a familiar route and arrive home without remembering most of the journey. You scroll for an hour and could not name what you scrolled. You sit through a meal and could not describe what you tasted. The eyes were open. The body moved. Things technically happened, but you, the witness, were elsewhere, wandering, rehearsing, worrying, planning, almost everywhere except here. Researchers who study attention have a name for this: mind wandering. By some careful estimates, the average person spends nearly half of their waking hours not fully attending to whatever they are doing, nearly half. That is, in some sense, a parallel sleep happening inside ordinary life. a daytime drift. This is not a moral failing. The brain is built this way. The default mode network we have visited several times tonight is, in part, the network of mind wandering. It hums quietly whenever your attention is not pinned to something specific, and it generates the inner narration of self, time, planning, memory. Without it, you would not be able to imagine your week or remember your childhood. With it, you constantly slip out of the present without noticing. So a large portion of your conscious life is, in a strange way, not very conscious. You walk through familiar rooms half asleep to them. You hear familiar voices without quite hearing them. The same beauty of a sky you have seen 10,000 times goes mostly unnoticed because the mind is busy elsewhere. Now consider this gently next to the question we have been holding. We have wondered what it might mean to wake from life, but perhaps a quieter, equally important question is what it might mean to wake within life. Not in some dramatic, mystical sense, just a little more often. A few more moments of actually being here. Some have said that the great spiritual traditions, at their core, are not about preparing for an afterlife, so much as inviting people to be more fully alive while they are alive, to stop sleeping through the days, to notice the warmth of tea on the tongue, the weight of a child's hand in yours, the slant of late afternoon light, not as performances of mindfulness, but as small acts of waking. The lovely paradox is that this kind of waking does not need to be earned or achieved. It does not require special states. It only requires noticing. A breath truly felt, a sound truly heard, a face truly looked at. In those small attentions, the half-sleep of ordinary life parts slightly, and life itself becomes a little more present. Tonight, of course, we are settling towards sleep. That is the gift of this hour, but it is worth carrying something forward into tomorrow. The same eyes that will close in a while will open again at some point, and when they do, there is the chance, however brief, to be a little more here than you were yesterday. You do not need to wait for the final waking to start practicing being awake. The smallest acts of presence are themselves a kind of preparation, a kind of softening, a kind of trust, and they are available, free, in every ordinary moment that has not yet been lost to the drift. We have walked a long, slow road tonight. We have circled the question of dying and waking from many sides, gently, without insisting on any single answer. We have listened to what the dying brain seems to do, to what mystics have said, to what monitors have shown, to what the body teaches us each night when it lets go into sleep. If you came here looking for a final, neat conclusion, you may notice by now that one is not arriving. That is not a failure of the walk. That is the honesty of it. There are questions that do not deserve to be closed. There are questions whose value is in how they reshape the asker, not in any tidy reply they might give. The question of what dying really is may be one of them, and the question of whether dying might be a kind of waking is exactly that kind of question. Hold it for a moment, gently, as if it were a small light in your hands. If the answer is no, if there is nothing beyond the body, then your life is the precious, finite, only chance you have to be here, and the people you love are the precious, finite, only chances they have to be loved. Under that light, every kindness matters more. Every soft evening matters more. Every breath matters more. If the answer is yes in some form, if there is some kind of waking that follows, then your life is part of a longer arc, and the courage and love you have given here are not lost. They are folded somehow into whatever comes. Under that light, every kindness still matters, perhaps in even more dimensions than we can see. And if the answer is some third thing, some shape we do not yet have a language for, neither yes nor no but something more interesting, then the asking itself becomes a way of staying near the mystery without diminishing it. Under that light, the question becomes a companion, not a problem. In every version, the life you are living right now retains its weight. In every version, love matters. In every version, presence matters. The question of what comes after does not undo the meaning of what is happening before. That is the doorway, not a doorway that gives you the answer. A doorway that lets the question stay open while you go on living, kindly, attentively, without grasping. Some have wondered whether the deepest meaning of our being here may always reach a little further than science alone can describe. That is not a denial of science. Science is one of the most beautiful patient projects of our species, but it is in the business of how, mostly, and the question of why anything exists at all, why there is a universe, why there is awareness in it, may belong to a different kind of asking, held with humility, not certainty. So we leave room for what we can measure, room for what we cannot, room for the silent suspicion that there is a depth to all of this we are not yet capable of fully describing, and we step softly out of the question, not having solved it, but having walked all the way around it. Now, slowly, gently, we begin to let go of even the wondering itself. As the night opens its quiet arms, the thinking now can begin to grow softer. There is no more weight to carry tonight. The big question has been walked around carefully, and it does not need any more circling. It can simply rest beside you, like a candle that has burned all evening and is content to glow without flickering. Notice the body, the slow rise and fall of breath, the small warmth where you are held, the quiet sounds, if any, of the place around you. None of these need to be adjusted. None of them need to be improved. They are already enough. Some have spoken of this hour as a small homecoming. The mind, after a long day of choices and worries, finally lets the future slip out of its hands. The future will still be there in the morning. It does not need to be held all night. It is patient. It can wait. What gathers in this quiet is not an answer. It is a posture, a way of being inside a question without needing to win against it. The nervous system, which has been alert for so much of the day, begins to ease. The heart rate softens. The shoulders release small tensions you may not have noticed they were holding. The body, very wise, knows what this hour is for. Researchers who study these slow transitions sometimes call this parasympathetic activation. The body switching out of its alert, doing mode and into its quiet, resting mode. It is a gentle inner change. It is not something you have to make happen. It is something you allow. You do not have to remember anything we have spoken about tonight. You do not have to carry forward any conclusion. The ideas have done their quiet work simply by being held for a while. They have softened a little in you, even if you cannot say how, and now they can dissolve back into the larger pool of everything you know and do not know. If your mind wants to keep turning, that is all right. Let it turn. Do not fight it. Just let the turning happen at a slower speed. Let each thought come, and then let each thought go, without holding on. The thoughts are like leaves on slow water. They drift past. The water keeps flowing. There is no urgency now. The night is long enough. Whatever rest comes will come in its own time. And even if sleep is shy tonight, this stillness is itself a kind of healing. The body is being held. The breath is doing its slow work. The mind is allowed for a while to do less. We have walked together a long way, from the strange architecture of waking, through the surprises of the dying brain, through the borderlands of awareness, through the gentle metaphor of sleep that human beings have whispered for thousands of years. Now we come simply to this, lying here, breathing, being. The great question stays open. It is not heavier for being unanswered. In some way it is lighter. It is a small lamp left burning, not a problem demanding resolution. You can let go of it now. It will be there if you want it tomorrow. Tonight you can rest beside it and let everything begin to slow. There is something beautifully ordinary about what you are about to do. You are about to fall asleep, or at least your body is about to begin its long, patient invitation towards sleep. It does not require your permission. It does not require your effort. It only asks that you not stand in its way. Think for a moment about what an act of trust this is. You will, in a little while, let go of your awareness, your name, your story, your sense of being a separate person, and you will hand all of it over to the soft hours of the night, without alarm, without a goodbye. The hands that have held everything today will simply open, and the day will slip out of them. We do this every night, and we do it without ceremony, without acknowledgement. Most of us never even thank our bodies for the strange and lovely thing they keep doing for us. The nervous system in this hour is shifting toward what researchers sometimes describe as high vagal tone. The vagus nerve, a long branching pathway that connects the brain with the heart, the lungs, and many other organs, becomes more active, slowing the heart, deepening the breath, softening the inner pace. It is, in some quiet sense, the body's own invitation to release. You do not have to do anything for this to happen. You only have to allow it. Lie still. Let the breath continue. Let the body do what it has done so many thousands of times before. Notice that you are not in charge of this. You never were. And how kind that is. Some have said that learning to fall asleep well is, in a small way, learning to trust the larger letting go. Each night you are practicing the same gesture, releasing your grip, trusting that something will hold you while you are not holding yourself. And every morning you discover that you are held. The night did not punish you for surrendering. It simply restored you in its own quiet way. It is worth carrying this thought lightly, here at the edge of sleep. You have already let go many times. You have already trusted many times. The body remembers how to do this. The mind, even if it forgets, follows. Even when the mind is restless, the body knows the way. It has the map. You only have to lie still and let the map unfold. If sleep is shy tonight, you have not failed. The trust is still being practiced. The body is still resting. The breath is still moving. Even waking quiet is restorative. There is no test happening here. There is only an invitation, gentle and steady, and you can accept it whenever you are ready. So allow yourself to be carried very softly by this small nightly act of trust. Nothing needs to be done. Nothing needs to be solved. The next breath is enough, and then the breath after that, and then, eventually, without your noticing exactly when, sleep will find you the way it has always found you, kindly. Notice the breath now, not to control it, not to deepen it on purpose, just to feel it gently as it is. The slow drift inward, the soft drift outward, a pause between, almost weightless, before the next inward. This rhythm has been with you since your first day. It will be with you in some form until your last. Through everything you have lived through, every joy, every grief, every triumph, every quiet moment of nothing happening, this breath has continued quietly without your needing to remember it. Pause on that. The most faithful companion you have ever had is breathing right now, inside you, without complaint. There is a small, lovely thing the body does that researchers have noticed. The breath and the heart speak to each other. The heart slightly speeds when you breathe in, and slightly slows when you breathe out. It is a soft conversation, played in millisecond rhythms. The body is, in some small sense, always singing a duet with itself, just below your awareness. You can feel this if you listen gently. The exhale carries a sense of release. The inhale, a small returning. Out and in, out and in. Like a tide that has chosen, for the night, a very slow shore. When the breath slows, the rest of the system tends to slow with it. The mind, which has been keeping such busy pace with the body all day, begins to settle into the body's softer rhythm. Thoughts grow less interesting. The pull to plan or rehearse loosens. The body becomes heavier in a good way, as if some quiet weight inside you were finally allowed to rest on the floor. You do not have to make the breath any particular way. There is no perfect technique. The breath has been doing this for you longer than you have known how to think about it. Just let it continue. Let each exhale be a little permission for the body to be where it is. Some have noticed that focusing softly on the breath is one of the most ancient ways human beings have found to slip past their own restlessness. Not by fighting it, by moving below it. The breath does not argue with thoughts. It just continues, and the thoughts, in time, follow it down. Many things in your life require your attention, your effort, your decisions. The breath is not one of them. It is a gift that arrives again and again without payment. While you do nothing, it does everything. While you are nothing in particular, it carries you anyway. So let it carry you now. Let it carry the small, tired weight of the day. Let it carry the leftover thoughts that did not quite settle. Let it carry the question we walked with tonight, which can sit comfortably anywhere it likes. Just the breath, just the soft returning breath. In, out, slower, softer, a quiet companion at the edge of sleep, walking with you toward whatever the night will bring, not asking anything, just there, always there, letting you gently be exactly where you are. The room is quiet, the body is heavy, the breath has slowed into its own soft rhythm. There is nothing more to think tonight, nothing more to wonder, nothing more to hold. You can let go now, not in any large way, not all at once, just a small letting go, a loosening of whatever was still tight, the shoulders releasing, the jaw softening, the hands opening, the mind allowing itself to drift just a little further from the day. The question we walked with tonight, the long, gentle question of dying and waking, can stay where it is. It does not need to be answered. It does not need to be resolved. It will be there in the morning if you want it, and in many mornings after that, and in many quiet evenings yet to come. The question is patient. It will wait. You have done enough tonight. You have listened. You have rested. You have allowed yourself to be carried, for a while, by ideas that ask nothing of you except to be considered. That alone is a small, complete kindness to yourself. Whatever the great threshold is, it is not tonight. Tonight is only this: the soft horizontal weight of your body, the slow tide of your breath, the quiet around you, the kindness of having permission to simply rest. Some have said that learning to rest deeply is itself a small rehearsal for the largest letting go we will ever do. If that is true, you are practicing well. You are doing exactly what is needed. There is no other task. There is no other place to be. If the question of waking ever returns to you, in some unknown future, in some moment you cannot yet imagine, you will not be a stranger to release. You have practiced it tonight. You have practiced it on every other night of your life. The body knows the way. The breath knows the way. Something in you has always known. So drift now, softly. Let the thoughts go quieter still. Let the awareness loosen its grip just a little. Let the soft dark of the room hold you, the way it has held countless sleepers before you. You are safe here. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to disappear gently into the kind country of sleep, knowing you will return. And if the deeper waking ever comes, in whatever form it may take, may it find you as gently held as you are right now. May the same softness that carries you into sleep tonight be there to carry you, one day, into whatever waits beyond. May the question stay open, and the heart stay soft, and the wonder stay alive, even as everything else finally slows. For now, just this: the slow breath, the quiet room, the body letting go, the mind letting go, the day finally letting go. Sleep is near, or perhaps already here. There is no difference really at this hour. You are held. You are loved by the simple fact of being. You are allowed now to rest. Good night, gentle traveller. Sleep well. Wake when you wake. Until then, we are with you in the quiet. Drift now, drift.